Today's lecture is going to be how do you go raise the next round of funding. So the assumption that I've made is that all of you have raised at least some money. So before we get too far, let me just check in with you and find out whether or not that assumption is true or not. So let's start with the basics. How many of you are defining yourselves as an entrepreneur and have a company? Okay. And how many of you have already raised some money? Ooh, not enough of you. Okay. So how many of the rest of you think that you're close to being ready to ask for money? Okay, we're getting more of the room involved. And so how many of you need $500,000? Okay, keep your hands up.
Or more, you mean?
Or more. Okay. How many of you think you need $1 million? How many of you think you need $1.5 million? How many of you think you need $2 million? How many of you think you need 3? How many of you think you need 4? How much do you need?
12.
Okay. I'm glad I just, broke out and just asked the question because we'd been going through the numbers. And for the record, I do know how to count, but okay. So some of this is not necessarily going to apply to you because when you're raising your second round of funding, you should have some facts about the business that become relevant to the investor's decision-making process. And when you're raising your first one, you have very few facts. So typically you're selling more of the concept, more of the vision, more of the potential of the company. And that's a different fundraising process. So I'm going to let you do the translation about what works for you versus for a later round of funding. So I thought I'd start off by a few quick definitions. And one of them is, where are you on the scale? So back in the 80s, I helped create this particular business model, which is the stages of growth. And it has since then become part of the academic teaching world. But basically, the concept is that as the company matures over time, which is on the bottom axis, more dollars are being invested in them. And the ultimate concept of all of this is that you are de-risking the investment the further along the line and the further up and to the right you go. So that by the time you become a public company, the question isn't whether or not the product or service will sell. The question is, do you have enough cash to keep the engine moving? So let's just do a quick, how many of you are past the product development stage? Okay, not bad. Anybody past market adoption?
I have a question.
Yeah.
When you talk about the market adoption, you're talking about having the beta users or revenue?
So market adoption not only means revenue, but significant revenue.
Okay.
Team expansion typically is when we start talking about changing out the CEO. Anybody at that point? Okay. Yeah. So the funding sources that are, yeah.
And infrastructure was what? Yeah, infrastructure development.
So infrastructure development is about building out the management team so that you have the reporting structures necessary for being a public company. So a lot of times these organizations are running pretty lean and flat, and in order to survive the IPO process, you need more than one layer between the CEO and the.
Thank you.
So there are multiple funding sources that are available to you. And one of the key issues that you need to start off before you even start talking to these individuals is to ask yourself a core question, which is, if I had more money, what would I do with it? Do I really need it? Because the minute you take money from at least the top group, the government grants and joint ventures are, this is not true for, but the rest of them, the minute you take money from somebody, trust me, they have an opinion about your business, and they want to share that opinion with you. And sometimes frequently. So, do you really want somebody else telling you what to do? If the answer is no, then you need to figure out how to build a business without funding. And the bottom two resources are really great things. One of the things that happens here in Silicon Valley is that we get so caught up on, who you got funding from is kind of like what defines you as an entrepreneur, rather than the quality of your own startup. In the government grant area, what they're saying is, we want to give you money. And in return, the most that we're asking for is if the government wants to buy your product or service, that you will sell it to us at the same price that you would to anybody else. I can always live with that condition. And then joint ventures are, I found a specific company to do business with, and they're saying, I need you to customize this so that I can use it. I'm willing to pay you for that ahead of time. You're going to put in the technology, I'm going to put in the money. You're going to argue over who owns the IP afterwards, and then you're going to go off and build that product or service for that unique customer. It's a wonderful way to be able to make money. So from now on, I'm working under the assumption that you're willing to live with the consequences of having an investor. So many people think about investors as, something on a fruit tree. They're around all over the place. All I have to do is go to the tree and pick one, and they're mine. That's not true. And here in Silicon Valley, this is becoming less and less true, even though we have a huge concentration of investors. So the part that most entrepreneurs don't understand at the beginning is, if your company does really well, chances are it's going to be somewhere in the 8 to 12 years before you hit an exit, if things are going really well. 8 to 12 years, at least here in Silicon Valley, is longer than most relationships with a spouse last. So pay attention to the fact that this is a long-term relationship. As an investor, one of the things that I'm really fickle about is, I know I'm going to be spending a lot of time with you. And if the chemistry between us isn't good at the beginning, I know for a fact that it will never get better. And so I would rather just say, thank you very much, no, and have you go off and find somebody else, than to get into a relationship where I go home every day and all I want to do is, kick whatever is closest to me because I'm so frustrated. Life is just too short. The other part about working with an investor is that a lot of entrepreneurs want a high brand associated with them because they think that makes them sound more viable. But what they don't understand is, when you receive little amounts of money from a high brand investor, and then they choose not to put in the big money, Everybody sits there and says, what do they know that I don't? And assume that there was some reason that made you undesirable for a big investment. And rather than take the time and energy to go find out, they just label you as damaged goods and move on to somebody who doesn't have that label. Abandonment is really expensive. So you need to, as an entrepreneur, you need to be fussy about who your investors are. And what qualities are they bringing? What extra value are they bringing? And down to the basics. When they speak, do you want to listen to them, or are you clicking off and saying, trust me, this is one of the most important, the first most important decision you're going to make is who your co-investor, or excuse me, who your co-founders are going to be. But your next one is who are going to be your investors. The other part that most people don't understand is if you're an entrepreneur, no matter how popular you are always in the selling mode for your startup, and you are always fundraising. So for those of you that sit there and say, well, I'm not a salesperson, my strong suggestion to you is go at least read a book about how to sell. Maybe even attend a seminar or two about how to sell. But if you're going to be a successful entrepreneur, either you need to hire somebody on your founding team that does know how to sell, or you're not going to succeed. And then finally, the one thing that every investor is focusing on is, why should I pick this company over all the other choices? I get somewhere, depending on how busy Silicon Valley is, on a year in, year out basis, anywhere from 3,000 to 6,000 business plans. You have a lot of competition. And out of that, my partners and I choose 4 to 6. Do the math. I'm saying no all the time. In order to get a yes, you have to offer something to me as an investor that I think is going to be compelling. And let me give you a hint. Money is my priority. I want to know, if I put money in, how much am I going to get back and when? And if you can't answer that question, then you're not the right entrepreneur for me. That's not to say you're a bad entrepreneur. It's just not a match. My criteria for investment is how much money are you going to make? I'm not investing for a cause. I'm not investing to help a underprivileged segment of society have a chance at the golden ring. I'm not doing any of that. I am cold, steely-eyed, show me the money. And once you get into the venture community, it just gets worse. That's all they're focused on. So instead of going around and having people say no, 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 no all the time to you, it's worth your time and energy to do a little bit of research and figure out who do you want to invite. And because you've done that research, you know how to structure the invitation so that at least there's some probability that they might say yes. So that means you need to do some prep work. For most people, that means a minimum of 6 months. And when I tell entrepreneurs, you're 6 months away from even being able to do the ask, they get really upset. So I realize that I'm talking about a perfect world here. Most of you will start asking tomorrow, maybe even tonight. But if you do your homework, the whole process will go a lot faster. So I would suggest that you start with figuring out how much money you need, because that's going to define who you really need to talk to. The process here is to figure out what your milestone is, then add 6 months, because nothing happens as fast as you think, and then figure out how much money it's going to take for you to survive that total period. Drives me crazy when I talk to an entrepreneur and I say, how much money you're looking for? $1.5 million. Oh, and why $1.5 million? Well, because that's what I was told to ask for. I mean, that just told me you did no research, no thought. You're just kind of a lemming. You're going to follow the crowd. You're going to do whatever the crowd tells you to do, and you're not going to put any thought into it. By definition, that's not my kind of entrepreneur. I want you to know what this exit strategy is for you. And this is your moment to tell me what your true heart's desire is. Do you really want to be a public company? I have a hard time believing that most people want that. It's a really unpleasant lifestyle. But if that's really what you want, I need you to tell me that. If you want to be acquired, but maybe you don't want to be acquired real early, you'd rather be acquired after you reach a certain sales point, then tell me that. But I need you to have thought about this question, because it'll define which checkbook I'm writing a check out of. I have short-term, medium-term, long-term investments. I need to know which one are you going to be in. Narrowing the list. Now that you have some idea of how much money you truly need, and you've figured out what kind of an exit, you can start doing the research to find out who's looking for that particular type of investment. The investment structure that you use is something that is virtually impossible for you to figure out by yourself. And you're going to need a lawyer to help you with this part. So let me stop and ask another question. How many of you have retained a lawyer to work with you? Okay. So for the rest of you that haven't, your first order of business, after you've figured out how much money you really need and what your exit strategy will be, is to go hire an attorney. To walk into my office without a lawyer that's attached to you and has provided some legal advice about the investment structure is just a waste of your time and mine. So, for those of you who haven't hired an attorney, let me remind you that here in Silicon Valley, all the major law firms have people who specialize in working with startups. They have a very, very beneficial plan where you're basically not paying anything until you get to a point where you can afford it. And then they're going to start off slow. And as you grow bigger and bigger, kind of work your way through the stages of growth, the law firm will start charging you more and more normal type rates. But in the early days, they're very concerned because what they're really doing is investing their time, which is extraordinarily precious to them. And they want every single one of their time investments to be successful. Which brings us to the next point. These law firms all have in-house marketing and salespeople whose full-time job is to make sure that the law firm's portfolio of clients are getting funding so that you can afford to pay their legal fees. let's be clear, nobody does anything, out of the goodness of the heart. Money is what's making Silicon Valley tick. So they have a vested interest. Why shouldn't you take advantage of that resource? Finally, you need to be ready for the investment process. If you send out an invitation for a meeting and then you get come on in tomorrow at 10 o'clock, you don't have a lot of time to put the investment materials together. You need them done ahead of time. And finally, if you've gone through the process correctly, the invitation gets issued. You should have a relatively high hit rate, should be something in the 60 to 70% acceptance, and your fundraising process will go a lot faster. So, one of the things about dealing with how much money do you really need is that by definition, since you're an entrepreneur, you're optimistic. And you just assume that everything you do will be right the first time. Except I know for a fact, I've done a lot of startups personally before I started doing investments. Nothing ever goes as fast or as smoothly as I assume they will. And just at the point where I think I have seen every point of failure, the universe laughs at me and says, "Ha ha, let me tell you about a new point of failure." And I'm like, oh. And, I'll be the first to admit, the universe can just really seriously mess with your schedule. So, my suggestion is to build in worst case scenarios. So you think you can do one product rev and it's going to be fine, but what would it cost for you to have to go through 2 or 3 product revs before the product got to where the customer needs and wants it? How much time? How much dollars? What happens if for some reason there was an economic shift? The stock market crashed. The venture capital community removed their checkbooks from the table and said, you know what, things are a little dicey right now. I think I just won't make any investments for maybe the next 6 to 9 months, which is what they did during the dot-com bubble period. Perfectly good companies just couldn't find the financing because the investment community wasn't willing to come to work. What happens if that time hits during your startup period? How are you going to keep the company alive? And by the way, this is the reason why everybody is starting to say, if you can oversubscribe, take the money. Because we're starting to feel like maybe the bubble has been pierced. The air is starting to slowly sneak out of Silicon Valley. And I got to tell you, I'm seeing all the signs that this is true. Investors are slowing down the investment process. They're investing smaller dollars. And they are using a much more stringent measure about who they're going to invest in than they were a year ago. Finally, you need to basically say, I need enough money to safely get to this milestone. Then once I've gotten to that milestone, I can go out and raise the next round of funding. But that'll take me another 6 months to do from start to finish. So I need to have that amount of time plus 6 months. That's how much money I need to go raise. And if you do that, chances are, first of all, you'll get it because everybody realizes how thoughtful you've been about the process. And the other part is that you've de-risked the investment a little bit by just being thoughtful in your planning. Your optimistic sense doesn't want to acknowledge that failure is the most likely outcome for every single startup. But your investors all understand and appreciate that, which is the reason why we all say, well, then if you're going to fail early and learn from it and then go start up another company. But there's absolutely no reason why, if you want to have a lifestyle company, which is our word for you're not taking other people's money in, there's absolutely no reason why you shouldn't do that. It's a perfectly good business. And especially if you can get government grants to help fund that company, more power to you. The other part is that you need to understand that the investors' patience and their expectations around the company are tied to those words that you said at the beginning of the relationship. If you said, my intent is to have this company acquired before we make $10 million in sales, they have decided already which checkbook they're writing, and even though 6 months in you've officially told them, oh, sorry, we've had a change of plans, trust me, the only thing they'll ever remember and the only thing they come back to time after time was, you took my money under this premise. And the relationship between you and the investor will always have a difficult time just because of this. Not saying you can't manage it, I'm saying it'll take more time to manage it. So it's much easier if you just pick the exit strategy and then stay with it. There are all sorts of money sources. Crowdfunding is something that a lot of people talk about. I want to be very clear, at least right now in Silicon Valley, I don't know any professional investor who will do a follow-on to crowdfunding. If you take crowdfunding money, you're by definition saying, I don't need or want professional investment. Why? The rules around crowdfunding are still unclear. It's an unnecessary risk. We as investors have a lot of choices. I don't need to take this risk, so I just won't. So if you want to do crowdfunding, which is not the same thing as crowdsourcing. Crowdsourcing means that you have put the product or service out and said you can buy it ahead of time, and then they've paid you for it, and then you use that money to finish up the product development. That's crowdsourcing. Crowdfunding means I've given them equity in exchange for cash. The minute you do that in a crowdfunding way, you've cut off the rest of the professional money. So if you want access to that for later on, and I'm guessing most of you probably do, then you need to decide whether or not you want to be working with a wealthy individual. Sometimes we refer to them as super angels, or an angel group, or do you want to talk to venture capitalists? And the corporate investor community is getting much more aggressive in their funding, and I'd be amiss if I hadn't mentioned them as a potential investor for you. There are several key issues that you need to decide about the investors. Do you want them to be local? Are they easy to be able to meet with? Or are you okay with them being remote, which for me means anything outside of the 9 counties of Silicon Valley? So, you know, Sacramento is remote for me. Or even further out is foreign. Do you want an Asian investor, or a European, a South American, a Canadian investor? They're going to have different expectations and perhaps different cultural interpretations of the relationship. Also, how much value add capacity do you need and want? Do you want to have an investor who will be there for all the rounds? Do you want one who can help you find the next round of funding? Do you want one who has the Rolodex that can introduce you to potential customers or potential employees or potential vendors? What is it that you need? This is the time to start thinking about all this. So assuming that you wanted to get to the venture community, I'm going to say over and over and over again, not all venture funds are the same. And in fact, they pride themselves about how very different they are. Fastest way to turn off a VC is to walk into their offices for a meeting and say, tell me about yourself. I didn't get a chance to read your website. Consider that meeting done. Their ego just cannot handle that. So, word to the wise, do your homework. So there are lots of firms. You can slice and dice them around all sorts of characteristics, figure out which ones make sense for you. And then once you figure out like what firm is in the right category for you, see if you can figure out who's the right partner. Because here's the part that a lot of entrepreneurs don't understand. Investors have capacity issues. If I'm a venture capitalist, my venture fund probably has put a limit to how many investments I can handle at one time. And most of them have put an additional how many new ones can I take on per year. Most of the time, that number is 1 or 2. So, if they are talking about in their blog or in their bio that they've just finished making their second investment that capped them out for the year, unless you're willing to wait until the following year to get the money from them, they've just basically told you they're not a buyer. They can't be. So why would you waste time and energy meeting with them? So a couple of ideas about how to do the research. The Ask Industry Experts, that translates to, remember those law firms that have the sales and marketing people? They already have these Rolodexes all ready to go. They buy all of the research on these guys. You go in, you talk to them, and you say, can you take a meeting with me? Can you let me look at the database? Or better yet, could you go through the database and provide this information to me? You're indirectly already paying for it. Why not use it? And then there are lots of lists and database. If you go online, TechCrunch is probably the one that's most accurate about Silicon Valley. But there are lots of other ones. And the minute you're willing to look at investors outside of Silicon Valley, the lists get easier to find. The individual websites of and blogs and their LinkedIn postings for the venture capitalists are required reading. So the investment structure basically is talking about what are the terms. Do you want a convertible note? Do you want an equity line? And then, you know, what are the details, because the devil is always in the details, about how you're going to set that structure up. I always prefer an equity round. And I want to be clear, you can come in with your lists of this is what I would prefer, but if I'm your lead investor, I'm going to tell you what your terms are. And then you can decide whether or not you can accept them. That's my role as the investor. Ye with the money gets to set the rules. So if you want my money, you're going to go with the terms that I set. Well, the truth of the matter is most investors have a pretty standard set of terms that they use time after time after time. And so if you check with anybody, including your lawyer, ahead of time, they can tell you whether or not that particular venture fund or that particular VC will work with those kind of terms. The other part is the conditions for closing, which is, you know, do you have to raise all the money? Can you raise just part of the money? And side letters abound in Silicon Valley. This is where little side deals get made. Typically, a board seat or a board observer position is done through a side letter. If you are talking about a corporate VC, chances are they're going to want to have some kind of relationship with you that allows them some benefit for having been your distribution channel. That's all going to be handled through the side letters. They take a while to work out, by the way. So the investment structure, the investment process is pretty straightforward, whether you're talking to an individual or a group or a venture fund. You need to get the introduction. You can send emails into a website, you can post anywhere you want, and with rare exceptions, it's not going to get you anywhere. At least here in Silicon Valley, we operate on referrals. So guess where the easiest referral source is for you as entrepreneurs? Law firms. Woohoo! The law firms can pick up the lawyer, makes a choice about whether or not he really cares about you. And if the answer is, I really, really care, he picks up the phone and he says, Carol, I just talked to this amazing company and you've got to get them over to your office right away. If he kind of cares about you, he sends me an email and he says, here's the investor deck. I think it's really interesting. Take a look at it. And if he's just trying to make you go away, he says, send Carol an email and use my name. I know exactly how to handle all three. So you get the introduction. You're going to go through some kind of screening process. With the exception of individuals, all the other investors will have individuals who are designated to kind of figure out who's really worth spending time and energy with and who's not. Most of the time, that means you're going to be talking to either an entrepreneur in residence or a lower-level associate. Do not make the assumption that that person is dumb. This person is listening to presentations day in, day out, typically anywhere from 5 to 7 a day. And if you're in an industry that's hot, chances are they've already heard about the industry, they're relatively up to speed on it, and though they don't know technically as much as you do, they do know what their partners are looking for. Treat them with respect. At some point, if you've been lucky and you've made a good impression, you get invited in to talk to the big guns, the partner meeting. You have only one chance to make a good impression with this group. And we're going to talk about how you increase that probability here in a second. Assuming that that goes well, they'll offer you a term sheet. You can negotiate it, but if it's way off from what you want, and your lawyer says, you know, we're just never going to be in agreement, you're much better off cutting and moving off than spending a lot of time and energy trying to make something that isn't going to work. Which, by the way, means you didn't do your research correct. And then after you've signed off on the due diligence, typically they'll ask for a period of time where you don't talk to anybody else, you're only paying attention to them. And they're going to do what's called due diligence. Everything that you've said to them, they're going to go out and reconfirm. Every number that you've shown them, they're going to look at and question and pick up and try to understand it. And at the end of that, the highest probable answer is, you know what? We thought you were a good investment, but because of this, this, and this, the answer is now no. You just took yourselves off the market for this period of time, and you probably told a lot of other people, oh, we have a term sheet from this VC or this super angel or this angel group. And now they said no. You just became tainted. So my suggestion is, since no deal is done till it's done, low profile. If it doesn't work out and you haven't talked about it a lot, who's to know? And you can move on. If you've been posting this on all of your Facebook and LinkedIn and all this kind of stuff, quite frankly, that may be part of the reason why they said no. And then it comes time for the funding, which is final legal documents. Again, your lawyer's going to handle a lot of this. But every deal gets renegotiated at funding. It's just the nature of doing a deal. So it's not done until it's done. And done for me means money in the bank. You need to be prepared for all of these stages, because if you are starting this, the speed at which the investor wants to go through this process doesn't allow you time to be educated. It doesn't give you time to practice. You need to have done all that ahead of time.
Question. The funding and renegotiation of the terms, doesn't it follow the term sheet that was negotiated, or do VCs?
So term sheets by definition are just kind of a letter of understanding. It's not binding. There are only two things that are binding, and that is that you're not going to shop, and that you're going to either provide all this information or not.
But even the financial terms of
Yep.
the term sheet?
Yep. Everything is negotiable. It was just a term sheet. So what do you need? I find having some kind of one-pager that you can send out. For the record, most investors don't really read this. What they do is they scan. There are specific pieces of information they're looking for. They're looking to see if that specific piece of information is on the sheet. You need to have it. But understand that this by itself is not enough. A lot of companies today are doing some kind of intro video. I love these because it allows me to understand the personality and the style of the individual as well as to obtain the information. But the key to the good video is that it's very short. An intro email, even though the lawyer is going to be sending the document, it's your company. How they talk about it makes a difference. I strongly suggest you craft this email for them. They'll customize it, but craft the intro email so that the key points that you think they need to be made are actually included in the email. And then you're going to need some kind of an investor deck. Almost every investor says, send me some additional information other than the one-pager intro and the email. And that additional piece of information typically is the investor deck. The investor deck has a lot of detail in it, but the presentation deck does not. the invitation deck, you're assuming that you're not sitting there with them going through it. So what they read is the sum total of the information they're going to have. They're probably reading it. So you can use smaller fonts, but when you get into a presentation deck, 24-point is as small as you ever want to go. And that's for things like the footnotes or the really, I don't care if you understood this or read this part. Anything that's important needs to be larger than 24-point. And then the key about a customized presentation deck, most people understand the importance of practicing the presentation ahead of time. What they don't practice are the question and answer periods. This is where almost all entrepreneurs really mess up. You did the presentation flawlessly. I mean, one of your best. And then a partner in the back asked you a question and you didn't know how to answer it. Opportunity gone. So the invitation desk, you need to remember this very basic concept. Investors are not buying your product or service. They are investing in the company. It's important for us to understand what the product or service is. And if we're technical, we might even enjoy getting into the details of the product or service. But that's not what's going to make us invest. I'm sure all of you have heard that investors talk about management. It's true. And it just drives me crazy when I see a management team slide that says, oh, we have Tom, Joe, and Joanne as the team. Won't even give me last names. And between us, we went to these universities and we worked at these companies prior to this company. Next, I'm making my whole investment decision based on, do I think this team can deliver me a profit? I need to know a little bit more than that in order to make that investment decision. I need to know a lot of things about the team. I need to know, have they ever managed people before? Have they ever done a startup before? Has the team ever worked together before? The more information you provide, the easier it is for me to feel good about the team, the more I become interested. The more interested I am, the faster the process will go. And if you ignore this need, I'm going to move on to the next company who understands that I am all about the management team. Which brings me to a subset. How many of you are single entrepreneurs? Don't come funding.
You mean not married?
No. As in, you don't have a team of people who are equal to you. It's not enough to have an engineering team somewhere else in the world. If you're going to get money and you're going to get serious money from investors, I need more than a single point of failure. If you get sick, if you get injured, if you die, I've lost my investment. I need a team to distribute that risk. Okay, so in addition to the team, I want to know who you're listening to. Who are you seeking advice and counsel from? And are they any good? And let me tell you, the fastest turnoff is that you put a high-profile person up as a key investor, and you maybe even make some reference to the fact that you actually talked to them, and I call them and they say, who? I'm really clear that at the end of the day, The part that's going to make the biggest difference is how intellectually honest are you, and specifically with me. How fast will you deliver bad news? Because the faster you deliver bad news to me, the faster I can help maybe change that bad news into an opportunity, or maybe even make that bad news go away. But if you deliver bad news to me at the last minute, I don't have any room to operate. So if you're going to lie to me about the relationship with an advisor right up front, I'm assuming you're going to lie to me throughout the relationship, and no matter how excited I was about the meeting, I am now totally out. Do not lie, do not mislead, do not misrepresent anything about your company in the investment process. You should have some, especially if this is your second round of funding, some performance to be able to talk about. What have you learned? What worked? What didn't work? That shows me your intellectual honesty again. And then finally, you need to do the ask. This meeting is a sales call. If you don't ask for the order, you're never going to get it. So how much money do you need? What are you going to do with it? How fast do you need it? All those types of things need to come in this part of the presentation. When you're doing a partner meeting, every group has their own format. And as comfortable as you are with your format, we're not trying to make it easy for you. You're trying to make it easy for the decision maker. Put it into their format. Spend the time with your champion, who's the one that got you in front of the partner group, saying, how do I need to customize this presentation so it's in the format that your partners are familiar? Do they want the first part of the conversation to be about management, or do they want to understand what your product or service is? If you do it in your order and not theirs, they'll put up with it. But the minute you leave the room, they will turn to your champion and say, did you coach this person? And they'll say, yeah, I told them to do management first. And they're like, but they didn't. And that labels you as uncoachable. Doesn't kill the deal, but it definitely started to sour it. Also, you need to be really clear about what's the possible outcome of this meeting. Are you going to get a term sheet out of this meeting? Will you get another meeting out of this meeting? You need to be clear about what their process is. Check in with your champion. Due diligence starts with little to no advance warning. And so one of the things that I try to get all of our startups to do is that the minute you create any kind of document, you drop it into some kind of storage in the cloud kind of, I don't care which brand you use, but put it in one place. And these documents include sales material, marketing material, all of your financials, all of your budgets, all the versions of those budgets, all of your board meetings, any kind of prep materials that you did for an advisor meeting. Everything goes into this document or into the storage unit. And the beauty of all of this is that when you need this information, it's much easier to go sort through it to figure out, what you're going to send to who, than to actually spend the time to go find it. So you've done all of your homework, You're ready to now start the invitation process. I want to be clear. The invitation process basically is a sales process. If you have any sales expertise in your team, ask them to lead this process. Who's going to be in charge of each candidate? Where's the information going to be recorded about what the next steps are? Who's going to make the decision about who goes to which meetings? All of that needs to be managed. The last thing that you want to do is be into a situation where Sequoia and Kleiner both said, yes, we can see you, and both of them are wanting to do it Tuesday at 2. You can avoid that if you manage the sales process correctly. And trust me, if you tell one that you can't do the 2 o'clock because you have to go somewhere else, not good. So because this is a sales process, a lot of people say, oh, I'm not a salesperson, I can't do this. I used to teach sales management all the time. That was my full-time job. I'm really clear. Anybody can learn to sell if you want to. And sometimes the least likely sales personality-like person is the most effective salesperson. They're not trying to con, they're not trying to be gimmicky, they're not trying to be false. They are just being them true selves. But they're very focused on, there's a process, I'm going to follow the process. And they end up being spectacular closers. So don't go label yourself ahead of time, oh, I can't do this. You can. You just need to spend a little time understanding what the process is. The other part is that there are going to be a lot of no's. None of these no's are going to be talking about who you are as a quality person. They're saying no for a whole bunch of reasons. Maybe they're saying no because they have a company already in their portfolio that is close enough to you that it just doesn't make sense to even take the meeting to find out if you're different enough that maybe they could squeeze you in. They just decided it was close enough, no. It has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do with them. And you cannot take this no personally. And in fact, when you get really experienced at this, you'll figure out very quickly that a fast no is probably the best gift any potential investor can give you, because you're not going to waste any additional time and energy with them. And then finally, and I've said this several times already, but no deal is done until you actually have the money and it has cleared the bank. And everybody laughs, but 2 years ago I had, it was a remote/foreign investor. They said, we sent the money, and we were like, yay, Little detail, we didn't bother to check with the bank, did they receive the money? Turned out they hadn't gotten it the next day, definitely hadn't gotten it by the third day. Qualifications for the close was all the money had to be in the bank, and we're like, oh, shoot. No deal is done until it is cleared the bank. And as long as you hang on to that as your mantra, you'll do great. Good luck, and I hope your fundraising efforts are successful. Yeah.
You mentioned that it's important to prepare for the question and answer period. Do you have any tips or strategies on how to prepare for it?
So as illogical as this sounds, practice doing the presentation in front of an existing investor and listen to the questions that they ask.
Carol, can you talk a little bit about dilution? I know that this meetup had probably to do a second round, but can you address first round dilution versus second round dilution?
For the entrepreneurs or for the investors?
More from the entrepreneur standpoint, please.
Sure. So you're basically, as an entrepreneur, selling your shares of the company. So if you're the original founder, you had all the shares. Then you decided to take on some co-founders. You gave them some shares, which they have to earn over time. And now you're in the process of selling shares. And every share that you sell means that your personal quantity of shares is decreasing. Now, hopefully, the counter to that is that because of the money that you get from the investors, the value of the company is going up and more than makes up for the loss of shares. That's the theory.
Hi, Carol.
Hi.
Can you learn a little bit more how you evaluate and define traction when looking at investments and what resonates to you and what maybe implies that they're going in the wrong direction?
So it's rare that an entrepreneur goes in the wrong direction. Sometimes they're not going in the easiest to obtain. They're not going after the low fruit. They're going after something really difficult. And there's another market that perhaps is a little easier to, or is willing to pay more, or so you can only know so much about the product and how the market is going to respond to it ahead of time. And then once you're out into the market, you're going to be constantly adjusting. So part of what we're looking for as an investor is, what's the story that they're saying? Were they clear and honest with us about the fact that they spent 6 months going after this market only to discover that there was this little niche within this market which was much more profitable, and so instead of going after this, they're now going after the smaller market? And because it took them 6 months to discover that, they're not at their revenue projections. I'm totally fine with that. I understand that that happens to almost every startup. But if they aren't intellectually honest and aren't complete in their conversation with me, and they say, we thought we would achieve this kind of revenue at this point, we missed that target, but we'll make it, with your money. I don't know enough to understand why I should believe you failed before. Why should I now believe that you're going to succeed? Being intellectually honest with your investors is really important. I want to come back to your question about dilution, because it's about the concern for dilution that causes entrepreneurs to really desire these outrageous valuations. And I would like to strongly suggest that you rethink that. One of the most damaging things that happens to any company is that you take in money at an outrageous valuation, as in, no sane business person would ever say that today that company was worth that much money. And then to really mess with your head, the universe said, yep, it's about time you learn an important lesson about how difficult succeeding in business is, so you significantly miss your milestone. And so now you're getting a huge education, and you admit to the education, and you go to your investors and you say, you know, boy, that was a difficult lesson to learn, but we've learned it, and you know, if you give us some more money, we'll get it right the next time. And here are the changes that we've made as a result of that. The investor community will come back and say, yes, I get it. You've learned an important lesson, but with my money comes a consequence. And we're going to do what we refer to as a down round. A down round is something that taints a company for the rest of the company. You can't hide it. Even when you go public, you can't hide it. And in that time of the down round, the person and the shares that are harmed the most are always common. The consequences of the down round is that the investors are now taking extraordinary risk. And for that, they want extraordinary upside. And for the most part, that means, not always, but a very large percentage of the time, common will never see a profit. You took an unnecessary risk by taking an outrageous valuation. If you had taken a reasonable valuation and hadn't gotten too greedy about that whole process, and then you failed to meet your milestone, you have no room to go down. Your investors aren't going to go below a certain point, because then it starts hurting them. And so, you know, maybe they'll do a flat round. Flat rounds happen all the time. Nobody thinks badly of a flat round. And life goes on, and you as a common shareholder still have a very high probability of being successful. Taking the wrong valuation has a whole bunch of problems. In the later stage, one of the things that Silicon Valley isn't talking about is that the people who are running the unicorns, which is a startup company that has a valuation in excess of $1 billion, that's with a B, billion dollars, are having a horrible time hiring the A++ players. Because they do the math, and they say the probability that when you go public, that the market will agree with this valuation is not high. And right now there's a fair amount of data that says that's a correct statement. And so they say, you know, you're going to give me the stock, but they're never going to be in the money. So why should I join your team? If you can't hire the A++ players, how are you going to get to a point where you could go public? And as a result, when you look inside a lot of these unicorn companies, you have a lot of open recs for high-quality people that they can't fill. And I'm real clear that when the bubble busts, this one is going to have a big consequence for the unicorns. Yeah.
So my question to you was, what advice do you have for students looking to become entrepreneurs?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
What advice did you have for students looking to become entrepreneurs?
So universities don't like me saying this, but unless you have previous business experience prior to going to college, and most people your age don't, you're not really prepared to be an entrepreneur, and being smart isn't enough. So my recommendation to a student graduating from college is to go work for an entrepreneurial company. And typically the place that you want to be is an entrepreneurial company that has at least 200 employees and be a part of that community. Stay there for 2-3 years, then break away and join a company that has less than 50 employees, and learn about what it's to be an entrepreneur in that community. And then inside that organization, break out again with people who you've now come to know and trust, and you've worked with them. Maybe you've worked with them in the other 2 companies, so that you have the beginning of a track record of knowing how to work together, and then go start up your own company. Good luck.
So Carol, I'm a single entrepreneur. I've been operating under a theory which potentially you're going to shatter. I don't know if that's going to be true. But you had a slide, which I was very interested in, that had to do with us being a single entrepreneur and trying to raise money. Very valid. But my theory has been to try to get traction, try to get some reference customers, then go after a first round, use that round to help bring in some co-founders. What's your comment about that versus getting co-founders initially before going after that first round?
Anytime you tell me that you have hired gunslingers as your co-founders, I don't think you have co-founders. I think you have gunslingers. A gunslinger is anybody who's available for hire. And so the very first time your company gets in trouble, and in a normal environment with true founders, the founders come together and say, ooh, we have a problem, we can solve it. Let's figure out how to solve it. And if that means we need to cut our salaries, or we need to cut expenses, or whatever, that's what we will do to make sure that the company goes forward. But when you have a gunslinger, they say, you are no longer able to pay my fee. Time for me to go find another gig. And they're out of there. And at the very moment that you need them most, they've checked out. That's a huge risk. I mean, if I lose the management team, I don't, as an investor, I can't do anything. So I'm really adamant about, I want my founding team to be totally committed to the success of the startup.
At first round.
From the moment I put my money in.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
You put a significant emphasis on lawyers, and something that hadn't really crossed my mind. So, yeah, no, it's a great concept. And through the process of scaling your company, the relationship with the lawyer is important. So, not to put you on the spot, is there some, recommended list of lawyers that you've worked with in the past that are quality? Because a lot of us don't spend time in law firms assessing their ability, right? Unless you drive down the street and, oh, there's Wilson Sonsini, Perkins Coie, things like that. So any suggestions around that?
Yeah, so the question really is, how do you go about picking a law firm, right?
Correct.
Okay. So here's my advice. You got to go shopping. It's not the brand, it's the individual. And just like in all the other areas, lawyers are really busy. So if they don't have time to focus on you, what's the point? So you need to be interviewing attorneys, and basically you want to ask them, how well do they know your industry? How well do they know the investors in this community? How well do they know the customers and the vendors in this community? I mean, you want to get some, credentials, because you want a value-added attorney. And then you want to know what kind of time availability they have. But the other part that you need to do is you need to figure out whether or not there's a chemistry between you and that attorney. If you're talking to any of the major law firms, they're all quality people. They all understand the law. That's not the question. The question is, when you have a particular sticky problem, are they willing to spend the time and energy to come up with a unique, super creative idea that will get you quickly out of the problem? Or are they going to say, yeah, look like you guys are in a pickle. Let's get you introduced to a wind down specialist. Chemistry is, with all vendors, the most important part. What you really, really want is somebody who not only personally believes, but is willing to use their stature within the law firm to get the right resources for you. So, for instance, when you are trying to hire your first professional CEO, you're going to need an employment law attorney to help you with that process. You don't want any employment law. You want the best one to be working with you. You want your attorney to spend their personal capital to make sure that the best one in their law firm is paying attention to his favorite customer.
Hi. I have a follow-on question. So let's say that we have a law firm working with us for a while and we don't really like them. Have you seen examples where people switch to a different law firm, and is there impact on the company? Because again, you've been with them for a while, they know your history, they've done all the term sheets and all that, but then somehow it didn't work out. So you're looking to get another firm. So is the knowledge transfer and all that, it's going to be a problem for the company.
So is it going to be a problem?
Is it going to be a
So anytime you do a change, it's uncomfortable. I mean, if you change who's your barber, it's uncomfortable the first few times. Change by definition is uncomfortable. Question is, what's the benefit? So here's the reality. The law firm would much rather, this is the firm, not the individual attorney, the law firm would rather hang on to your business because they've invested in you already. And so they would rather change who the attorney is that's working with you rather than lose you. So there are a couple of ways where you can go have that conversation with the law firm. If you've met any of the marketing and sales types within those law firms, telling them that you're thinking about leaving, but you were wondering if there was an alternative lawyer inside the law firm that might be an alternative to who you're working with, trust me, that goes straight to the top of the firm, and somebody will call you back typically within hours. And they'll start suggesting that you meet with other attorneys. The other thing is that you can have your investor. Most of us know all the lawyers really well. And we can make some introductions. And then, sometimes it's just healthy to have change. Maybe the relationship has gotten to a point where, you need to have a higher industry expertise, maybe a higher profile attorney. On a practical basis, whenever two attorneys enter the negotiation process, the very first thing both attorneys do is figure out who's the more important / senior attorney in the room, and for the most part, that's who's going to win. As the entrepreneur, you want that attorney to always be the winner. So if you're working with one law firm and the only person who really knows anything about you is a very junior person, and you're going to need to send them in to do the negotiation, I can guarantee you're going to lose, and you're going to lose a lot. So changing law firms so that you can have a more senior person. But for the record, the existing law firm really would like the chance to be able to simply change the attorney. So totally up to you about why you're changing. If you're having problems with how they're billing you, changing the attorney within the law firm isn't going to help the problem.
I also